This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, I am in Ferndale, Michigan, and we're here at Schramm's Mead in Ferndale. Joining me for the podcast are Ken Schramm and James Naeger. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Pleasure and a privilege.
It's good to be here.
This is one that we started having this conversation last fall. James wrote a story on honey quality. Actually, you just reached out and like, hey, I'd love to write for you guys. And like, we would love for you to write for us also. And we found,
Well, thank you.
And after some long conversations where we found the right topic, you wrote a story on honey quality for our Pale Ale and Beyond Beer issue that's out right now for Craft Beer Brewing subscribers. And that led to this conversation, or this idea that we should also do a podcast. It's actually been something on my list for years and years and years now. And we're going to talk about making mead today. This is only in the history of the podcast. This is episode 289. This is the second episode we've ever done on mead making.
Oh, wow. What was the first one?
It was Jeff Herbst of Superstition.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was a few years ago. So only the second. It's not a topic we talk about a lot, but mead being kind of beer adjacent, and using a lot of the same things, a lot of the same kind of materials, whether it's fruit, whether it's honey, that are also used by brewers. I think it's always interesting to get the opinions and approaches, that you all take towards this that can also, be cross-applicable and impact folks. We're going to talk about using fruit. We're going to talk about honey quality. We're going to talk even about corks, because that's something that you all are very, very passionate about, or at least James is.
Oh, I'm there too.
Yeah.
I'm there too.
Yeah. We're going to get a little bit nerdy about the high end of quality and some of those differentiating factors and some of the hard ways and kind of disciplined approaches that you take to try to make mead at this high quality. Before we do that, G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years, and G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's micro-channel condensers are designed for less power draw. They have a lighter weight and a more compact design, using up to 70% less refrigerant, and that means a lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call them to discuss your next project. This episode's also sponsored by BSG Exclusive, distributors of Rahr Malting Company, producers of quality malt since 1847. Navigating the seas of brewing can be a treacherous affair, so let Rahr North Star Pils be your guide. With overtones of honey and sweetbread, flavor and aroma notes of hay, and a nutty character, Rahr North Star Pils is a base malt you can set your compass by. Great for any beer style, but perfect for a classic lager. Set a course for bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn how. Ken, why don't you give us the story of Schramm's Mead? It's something. I mean, you occupy this space in mead making in America that's pretty pivotal. You wrote basically what is the standard book on the subject here, The Complete Mead Maker. Anyone who is a fan of mead is familiar with Schramm's. But in a nutshell, give us that history. What took you down this road?
Even early on in the 70s, when I was a high school student, I learned that there was a spectrum of quality in beer.
Sure.
I figured out pretty early on that I didn't really like American style pilsners, and I talked to my dad, who had been to Germany as a kid, and said, "Hey, well, what's a good beer? What's an actual good beer?" And he said, when I was over there, I loved Dortmunder Union, and I really liked Lowenbrau from Munich. And so I as a kid, I walked into my favorite beer store, and with my heart, pumping a mile a minute, I put a 6-pack of each on the counter, and they let me buy them. And it changed my outlook. I began to understand what quality in beer was like. In the 1980s, my brother bought me a home brewing kit for a Christmas present. And in there was The Complete Joy of Homebrewing by Charlie.
Yep.
And if you look at the number of people in the brewing community that started brewing by using the complete joy of home brewing, I'm sure that it's the vast majority of people who have, you know, significant spots in the commercial world today.
Sure.
Maybe not Grossman and Larry and some others, but a lot of the people that are pretty prominent.
You don't get to millions of copies sold without impacting a bunch of people along the way.
His impact was huge. And then in the back of the book, there's the appendix on how to make mead, and I took a liking to it. I'm a, you know, sort of a, I don't want to say an artisty guy, but I was in video production and a musician, and I liked creative outlets, and it really clicked to me that mead was sort of this wide open field. There was no real American culture. There weren't commercial standards. What you had to do was to figure out kind of what in your mind's eye, or what I've even referred to as your mind's tongue, you want to come up with. And then you go out there and pursue it. And so I started that. And that led me to start the Mazer Cup in we went ahead and registered with the AHA in 91 and held the first one in July of 92, and things kind of snowballed.
Yeah.
And now I knew more. I had more reference examples. I tasted some really incredible fruit meads by Robert Keim. Robert Keim was the first place, you know, it was a best of show winner in the first ever Mazer Cup. He was a honey guy and was the scientist pretty much pioneering ultrafiltration for mead back in the 90s.
Yeah.
But I got to taste some great stuff, and then you know, that led to Zymergy asking us to do presentations at the conferences, which led to articles, which led to more presentations, which led to more articles, and pretty soon Dan McConnell, who was my co-conspirator at the time, we became known as the Mead guys, and that's how when Dan's a career research microbiologist at the University of Michigan. He's Dr. Dan McConnell, and he's probably the smartest guy I've ever known. So when it came time to write a book, he was working on grants with Harvard, and I had time, and so I wrote the book by myself. And that kind of got started. And from that point on, I think I knew what I was doing. I was making meads that I liked myself, and I was familiar with great beers, and as I was writing the book, I made myself familiar with great wines. So I kind of knew that I was at a standard that was potentially commercial in quality. Yeah. And I got a lot of encouragement. There were a lot of people who said, you should start a meadery. And so I did. Eventually I did. I mean, I needed to get my kids through college first.
Yeah.
And I was working in television production. I had a career that I couldn't really just abandon quickly. I had benefits for my family and all the things that you're supposed to have after you've been doing something in your actual field of endeavor for a career. So it was tough to make the leap. But at some point I finally decided, okay, if you're going to do this with your whatever time you got left, it's now. It's time to go. So in 2013, we opened our doors. And in fact, while we were in the process of getting open, that was when I met James. He looked me up and said, "Hey, I hear there's something going on. Can I help?"
So your relationship predates James's relationship then, because you were
with Al. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was in.
You became a part of the family, literally, later on.
I like to start with this so that people know that there's no nepotism involved. But I reached out to this guy prior to my relationship with Allison.
Allison is your daughter.
Allison is Ken's daughter. Yeah. One of them. I was just a molecular biology grad student. And I think like every other biology grad student in the world, I was fermenting things and wanted to work at a brewery because, molecular biology is really exciting, but it's a lot of reading papers and, your eyes start to bug out a little bit. So I was working at a couple breweries just 5-10 hours a week while I was a graduate teaching assistant as well. And I think I made one mead prior to working at Schramm's Mead. But I discovered mead at Bee Nectar here in Ferndale. They were, I think, one of the biggest meaderies in the world at the time, or in the U.S. at the time, but they were still relatively small compared to where they are today. But, this mostly carbonated styles of mead, which are hydromels. It's lower ABV, more akin to some craft beers or seltzers. And I thought, okay, this is pretty good. And then there was one that was like $10 for an ounce. And I was like, well, this is insane. What is this? And I don't know. I just said, whatever, I'll try it. And I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. It was a Ken Schramm series, Heart of Darkness from Bee Nectar. I think this must have been 2010. I think they were pouring 2009 in 2010, and there was another release in 2011. And that night I went home on my Kindle and I got Ken's book and I started reading it. And it's a pretty exciting book from a certain perspective. Unlike a lot of other, there are some brewing books that are like this, but it starts with a lot of history. And I think like Charlie's book is very flowery language about mead in terms of how awesome it is. And I was like, I can kind of see that. I've tried the Bee Nectar stuff. It was good. And then the Heart of Darkness was like a step above. So I reached out to Ken and said, hey, I heard I think I Googled him. And that's when I realized he lives like 10 miles away from me here in Metro Detroit. And I just sent him an email saying, hey, do you need any help at the meadery getting started? I'm working at such and such breweries. I'm in grad school. And he's like, no, I don't. But I could really use your help picking cherries. And I said, oh, okay, well, that seems less exciting. But then I come to realize that the cherries that go into the Heart of Darkness that I just had. So very quickly I was like, sure, let's do it. So I met him in Troy, where at the time it was the only place that we had these cherries, that Ken had the cherries. And I was just pitting Charbecks the first day I ever met Ken. And it was pretty fun. And, getting to taste almost immediately one of the best meads in the world, if not the best mead in the world, was really kind of formative for me. And then, like I said, I think I had only made one mead at home, and it was better than my first beer, but it was sort of middling. And, from there, it was very, very quick. I think for both of us into the world of commercial mead making, which is slightly different than what you would do at home. But it was quite a transition. We had to really sit back and analyze and say, do we know what we're doing? Is this what other people are doing? What are other people doing that we're not doing? Because this seems wrong. Like working with a drum of honey for the first time. It was kind of like we learned how to do it together in a lot of ways. And we came up with new processes and different techniques on our own that we've subsequently shared with a lot of other folks in the industry, including Bee Nectar. And it's been really fun.
Yeah, the story that James tells, it kind of takes me back to one of my mentors. One of my real serious mentors was Bill Pfeiffer. He was one of the first 5 national beer judges. That's how I got to meet him. I picked up my first copy of Zymergy magazine, and in there is an article about, well, here's the beer judge certification program, and here are our first 5 national judges, nationally ranked judges, and one of them is Bill Pfeiffer. He's from Wyandotte. He lives, at the time, again, he lives 10 miles away from me, and so I called up Bill Pfeiffer and said, hey, will you taste some of my meads and some of my beers? And he said, yeah, sure, come on over. Which I mean, that to me, I at that point, I mean, I knew I had to pay it forward. By the time I met James, Bill had already died, unfortunately. But it was really formative to me, because if all of this is going to grow and prosper, we all have to take people under our wings and show people things that we know and help each other. And so James said, hey, can I come on over? And the answer, should have been and was, yeah,
I probably should have been no, but
Well,
yeah,
but
so-
it's part of the process for the entire industry. It has been for a long time.
Well, I love from personal, perspective that you came from a position of creating content to then creating a business, based on this subject. And I think it's also interesting that the commercial side of Schramm's Meadery, James has been involved from those early days, and you kind of have gone along to this, and you all have been figuring out a lot of things. This is not like there was a playbook, people getting into the brewing world now. There's a lot of resources for them on how to become a professional brewer. It wasn't like that existed in the mead world in the early, around the 2010, 2011, 2012, as you started forming the idea of actually creating a business around this.
Sure. I mean, and there are a number of people who and myself as included, who have said that mead is kind of where craft beer was 20 or 25 years ago. And my book came out, I think, 21 years after The Complete Joy of Home Brewing. So there's a certain logic to that. But there's also the reality that there was no commercial mead making community in the United States ever, right? We are making this up absolutely as we go along. There are no precedents, and the craft beer world, there was a period of time during Prohibition when there was no brewing industry in the United States, but really there's been a brewing industry in the United States since there's been a United States. So the aspects of the commercial mead industry, if you want to call it an industry, are indeed out as we go. There's just so much that we are literally figuring out. There are no mead tanks. That you can use wine tanks or you can use brewing tanks. There were no mead
milk tanks
or milk tanks. Yep, exactly.
We're laying the track in front of us as we go.
That's exactly correct.
Because, and I'll just say it, a lot of commercially available mead is really bad. And a lot of the mead making practices that are out there are really bad. And that's even before we get into the modern winemaking stuff that we were talking a little bit about earlier. There is a mead industry, but everyone is doing their own thing. It's not, the mead industry hasn't coalesced around sort of any set of industry best practices like you might have with beer or in wine, where you have the Seibel Institute, you've got UC Davis, the School of Winemaking, you've got Geisenheim in Germany.
Germans.
All of these people are coming from somewhat of a similar background of training, but there's no such thing for mead. And everybody is coming from mead to mead from their own perspective, and most of them without any sort of credentials or training. And so it's good. There's a huge diversity of mead making styles and mead makers out there, but most of them are lacking in experience and credentials.
Yeah.
And that has really represented itself in the industry as a whole, because it's like the Wild West. There are very low capital requirements for a meadery compared to a brewery, for example. And, you don't necessarily need access to a vineyard or a vineyard of your own to make mead. You can buy honey, you can buy fruit, you can buy spices, and you can make it in your basement. And so there's a lot of folks that come from home mead making to commercial mead making, and they bring that same mentality. And it just is difficult on them and on consumers as well. One thing that comes to mind is this pumps versus pails issue that I'm somewhat of, and whatever industry, we'll do air quotes here. The mead industry is relatively a ragtag group of people, but I'm a huge safety nut. And one of the things in a meadery that you need, if you love yourself, is a honey pump, because honey is heavy. It sucks to work with. It comes in these drums. If it's not liquid, you got to make it liquid. But even at a medium to large scale, you have brewers and mead makers using pails of honey. And you see these shots on Instagram where they've laid out their 100 pails of honey. And it just makes my elbows hurt. He's had elbow surgery. My elbows hurt. Like, lifting pails of honey sucks, especially if you're going up and over into a tank. And all too often, if it's
OSHA issues there for sure.
Well, right. I mean, it's more than 40 pounds. It, you know, a 5 pound pail or a 5 gallon pail of honey is a significant amount of weight, but you know, it also it ties into the quality aspect. If you're getting honey in pails, it's almost always going to be filtered. You can get those little bee blankets for a pail, but most of the honey that you get in pails, at least at a certain scale, if you're looking at 100 pails of honey, those are filtered pails because it's going to be liquid. If you filter it, it'll stay liquid much longer. So getting a pump allows you to get raw honey closer to the beekeeper, and so you get a higher quality product, but then you have to work with it somehow.
You jumped past my segue, and that's okay. That's okay, because I think it is important, and I think what we'll do through the course of this podcast is talk about some of those quality items, to try to lay down some groundwork, to talk about some of those key things that people should be paying attention to in quality all along the way, from again, from the way that you're using honey through the kind of way that you use fruit in the process. Obviously, fruit's a giant piece of this. Also impacts the entire fermentation process now from you, because as much as you're making mead, you're also making mead and fruit wines in that sense. And there's fermentation implications from both of those elements in this, and then down through the packaging, because that is that end process, whether it's filtering or fining, is again something that you all have very specific ideas around, and then into the packaging to allow for longevity in the package. We can talk about that entire framework for quality in this. Before we do that, AccuBrew is a game-changing fermentation monitoring system that gives you unprecedented insight into your yeast's health and activity. The AccuBrew sensor mounted through your tank's sample port creates a record of sugar conversion, clarity, and temperature for every batch run. Step into the modern era of brewing and get your hands on a system that helps deliver your best brew every batch. Like to improve? So does AccuBrew. Something big is coming. Find out more at accubrew.io. Also at ProBrew, they believe that your brewery deserves equipment as unique as the drinks that you craft. That's why their solutions are specifically designed to help you brew your beer, not someone else's. From brewing to fermenting to carbonating and can filling, ProBrew's customizable equipment empowers breweries to expand their operations at their own pace. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading to oldorchard.com/brewer. So let's keep that question of honey quality going. You mentioned the pail versus drum piece, and the pump versus pail is driven by, refinement in the honey itself. Talk to me about the difference in that. What is that difference then from your perspective, using honey on a very routine basis, that comes from filtered honey versus not filtered? And as you all are thinking about honey and honey quality, what are some of those kind of key points and those key metrics that you use, to determine that quality? Again, there's not really a giant set of standards within this industry that you want to hit. If we're looking at malt and the beer side, you can look at your COA, you can understand, what's going on in this fermentable, you have all of the data out there, for every batch of malt that you might buy. You guys don't have that same kind of thing in honey. So how do you start figuring that out?
We bought a lot of honey,
a lot of samples as well.
We bought a lot of honey, and I went to the National Honey Board and I got the names of producers, and I called them up and I asked them if they were willing to sell us drum quantities of honey, and if they were willing to send us samples. And we went through hundreds of samples. Hundreds of samples. We went through probably dozens of samples from different suppliers, and then when we hit the supplier that we're using right now, he said, I package many different lots every year, and the lots can be 9 to 12 drums from a given extraction day. schedule, and I can let you sample the individual lots. And so we did. And he still maintains that standard of allowing us on an annual basis when we make our purchases from him to let us taste through different lots that he's got and pick the ones that we like the best.
It's like hop selection for honey. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And right now, because everything that James said in the article, which you should read, is accurate. But what it kind of gets to at the end in the end analysis is that right now we're still left with a human sensory apparatus to go ahead and make value judgments. And so it's really important that you familiarize your own human apparatus with the quality spectrum and then use it as best you can until the time. It's never going to be replaced. Just as the same thing is going to be true with hops. People can, and this is the rule that I learned in television. Don't count on the scope, right? You can believe that camera, because you looked at the scope, the numbers, all the dots are in the boxes right now. But when you look at it on camera, look at it on the monitor, it doesn't match the other cameras. So you're going to have to paint it, right? And the same thing is true with sensory analysis. In every endeavor, every theater, you're going to have to figure out where your own human mechanism sits with respect to all of these things that you've got to analyze and make judgments on it. And in fact, I have to rely on James to tell me, no, that drum's red, Ken.
Yeah, he's colorblind.
Yeah,
sure.
But
it's difficult to make fruit wines with this man.
I'm really counting on my nose and my taste buds.
Picking cherries. I don't know how he even gets a cherry, because red and green, you can't tell the difference.
Well, you make
it's
adjustments. The human mechanism also comes to understand the over 20 however many years of picking charbakes to figure out which ones are ripe and which ones are not. But that's very much the situation. Is we rely heavily on our own analysis of the product. And
because you have to.
We have to.
There's no analysis at all on these.
Right.
Even if you get a full truck, like 55 drums of honey, it comes with no analysis whatsoever. There's a little bit of moisture analysis because our beekeeper does that. For each individual drum, he'll note the moisture content, but that's it.
Yeah.
We know where it's from. We know who's doing it. He's extracting the honey directly into the drums, and we generally buy directly from the beekeeper without any sort of processing at the honey packer. They will do all kinds of stuff at these honey packing operations, and some of them are good for honey quality, and some of them are bad.
Like what?
So filtration, for one. Even just processing honey. We talked a little bit about the bee blankets. The bee blankets are just like it's a thermal wrap for a drum, and you can get them for pails. You can get them for drums. You can get them for totes. Most honey that's in totes or tanks, like you can order a tanker truck of honey if you really are interested. Most of that is filtered because to
make it flowable,
to make it liquid, to make it easy to work with, to make it so that you're able to work with it on a reasonable time scale, And so what's reasonable?
That goes in a tanker truck, and then it becomes an almost solid, and then you have to heat that up to get it to come out of a tanker truck.
Right.
You don't want to leave a tanker truck sitting there for a couple of days to warm it back up.
You have to heat it up at every step. You have to heat it in the tank. You have to heat it in the manifold. You have to heat it in the pipes.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of heating that goes along with processing honey. And so getting it from the extractor, from the beekeeping operation directly into the drum, it's gonna turn solid immediately because he's not filtering it. Any sort of beeswax or pollen or literally a bee's knee will cause the honey to crystallize very rapidly. It'll act as a seed. So you're very quickly stuck with 660 pounds in a steel cylinder that you need to get into a tank. And so heating it is a necessary thing at this point. And it's also necessary for filtration. It's necessary for packaging. If every step from the beekeeper on, if a drum of honey goes from a beekeeper to a honey packer, they're going to do something to it, even if it's just heating it up a couple times to get it into a smaller container. So generally speaking, if you've got pails, it means that it's gone through a honey packing operation, or it's been put in the pail directly by the beekeeper. So if you have a small enough operation that you can buy pails of honey directly from a beekeeper, that's awesome. We get pails of honey like that all the time. I just spoke with Wayne Gibbons. I bought a pail of his yellow sweet clover honey, which is apparently phenomenal. But, for one batch, we're using 2 or 3 drums for like a mid-sized batch. And so that's the leap that we may have missed, is going from what is very, very small, and meaderies can be very small because of the nature of the business, because of the nature of the capital requirements for a meadery. A lot of these folks are starting off with very little background in professional winemaking, and they're starting on a very small scale. Like we here, I feel like we're fairly large. We have 8 or 9 employees. I feel like this is it's the biggest operation we've ever had here. But we are legally still a boutique winery. We're a very small winery, legally speaking. Meaderies are often much smaller than we are. So they're using pails. They're thinking about breaking into drums. What that usually means is they're getting 10 to 100 pails of honey that is generally filtered, unless they're getting it from somebody that they know, unless the beekeeper's putting it in the pails directly, as opposed to going from drums to pails. So generally speaking, if you can get to the drum quantity and if you can get closer to the beekeeper, it's going to be of a higher quality. But then you have to deal with the reality of solid honey.
Those honey packers are not necessarily looking. I mean, mead in the total use of honey is a very small part of the overall honey industry.
Oh, for sure.
And so they are not necessarily needing to optimize processes for those mead makers out there, because there's just so many other users of honey out there in the general economy.
Literally, General Mills is one of the top purchasers of honey in the United States. Yeah. It's 4 or 5% of their total bill for honey nut Cheerios primarily. And so they're using tanker trucks, 10 tanker trucks a quarter. And it's just a different level of quality. For bakers, it's literally a separate grade, and it's how they process the honey has a lot of implications for its downstream uses. But really, anything like they're doing really wild things in the honey industry right now that I'm just now learning about. So I'm getting into beekeeping, and I'm writing some articles. I'm working on a book, but there are honey dehydrators. There are guys that are trying to take truckloads of fermenting honey, drying it out to pass it off as honey that is not previously fermenting. And they're not doing anything else. They're just drying it out. So it's there's existing biological activity in the honey. It's fermenting away 19%, 20% moisture content. Instead of doing something else with it, they're running it through some relatively expensive machinery to lower the moisture content so that they can sell it.
Yeah.
But it's not being labeled as such.
Sure.
So you never know how much heat the honey has experienced. You never know how much filtration. And you never know. I mean, that's kind of like spoofulation of the honey itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing, I'm going to back up to Bill Pfeiffer for just a second. Bill taught me one of the most important principles that I know of in terms of brewing and mead making. And his concept was that everything that you do in the process is an opportunity to screw up.
Yeah.
Right? Every process that you add to your total process, every individual step that you add, which is an intervention, is a chance to mess things up. And the best thing to do is to start with the highest quality ingredients and then get the hell out of the way, right? And it is. Forgive me if you've heard the line before, but it is a little bit like the Ginger Rogers comment that, I do everything Fred does, but I do it backwards and in heels. But you need to do it in such a fashion that you do the things that you need to do and none of the things that you don't need to do. And so we try to buy the honey directly from the beekeeper, and we ask the beekeeper to take it out of the hives and put it in the drum. I mean, well, he's doing that anyways, but instead of selling it to a processor, sell it to us directly. And so now we know we've got exactly what he made, no HFCS added, none of that stuff going on. That every step along the way, there's a chance for somebody to do that to you. So
you shorten that chain of custody, and so that there are no steps between that,
and no steps that could potentially, we're not going to take the pollen out, we're not going to take the colloids out, we're not going to take the propolis out, we're not going to take any of that stuff out. We're going to leave it in, and I mean that's a big part of our philosophy, is that the deliciousness of our mead is always going to be about what's in there and not about what we took out.
Yeah.
It's about finding great things and then maintaining their quality through the process.
Talk to me, Ken, about, as you are using this sensory organ, your own senses, and you are evaluating these lots of honey from this, beekeeper, this honey producer who you now have trust in, and they're producing at a general quality, and then they're doing it in a authentic way, and not cutting corners. As you're tasting across these lots of honey, what do you then start to look for? Are there some things that automatically might disqualify something for you? Are there like positive selection attributes where when you taste and smell this, then it really jumps out at you and becomes something you want to use? What does that process of evaluation look like for you?
Well, I'm gonna back up and talk about one of the things that I did kind of for myself and also for the people that have attended the classes that I've taught at UC Davis. I did a thing on the human sense of smell and taste. I did a presentation on that, and what I did in that presentation is to isolate the major components of honey, which is dextrose and fructose, and then maltose, which is probably the third sugar that is extant in honey, and then also to understand the acids that are commonly in honey, which is gluconic acid, and then the acids that are commonly in fruit meads, which are citric, malic, and tartaric, and to taste them individually. I did this initially to familiarize myself with the components of honey on an elemental level. And so now I can taste through honeys and say, well, this has got more fructose, or this has got more dextrose, or this has got a lot of maltose. I haven't done maltotriose yet, but I want to. I can taste the difference between all those different acids. But then there's also the issue of the balance in the aromatics between florality and fruitiness. And those are present in all honeys. And do you want to lean towards something with a high degree of florality, like orange blossom, or do you want to lean towards something that has a higher degree of fruitiness, like blackberry blossom? Right? Each honey's got its own signature. I mean, each individual honey has its own signature, and then more broadly, blackberry blossom. Not a specific example of blackberry blossom, but all blackberry blossoms are going to have a higher level of maltose and a higher level of fruitiness than orange blossom does, for example. You taste a lot of honeys. I collected hundreds of honeys, and in addition to the ones many hundreds of honeys, including things like Tasmanian leatherwood and blue gum and red gum, and the stuff from Australia and the stuff from the United States, and get familiar with them. But then you do have to rely on yourself. And what I know for a fact is that, here's another analytical tool I use. I will frequently dissolve the honey in the same relative ratio of liquid that I would use if I was making a traditional. So 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 of water and honey. and then smell and taste it at that point, because you'll know then when it's more diluted what's there. And it's very much like you add a little bit of water to a glass of scotch, and,
Sure.
and the thing blossoms and opens up. Now, the honey will do the same thing for you when you do that. But then understanding and being critical. This is kind of, I guess I'll get to the mead open that maybe we can talk about later. But this notion that there is going to be truly a subjective analysis of good or bad. Do you like it or don't you? De gustibus non est disputandum. Do you like it? Is it great or is it good? And you have to be willing to make that value judgment. For me, the things that I don't like in honey are vegetal characters or pine, excessive piney characters. All of those things, if they're not pleasant when you're tasting it as a honey, they're not going to be pleasant after you've fermented it out, especially if you're in a situation where, you're making something that's off dry or dry. You've removed all of the sweetness that makes the thing just sort of subjectively pleasant, and now what you're left with is everything else. So you have to be able to analyze the honey to determine, is what's there that's not sweet pleasing?
Yeah, that hedonic judgment. Let's I think that's really interesting, and I love to get in the minds of great makers to kind of see what that that thought process looks like. Let's talk about mead making next. Before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brew house to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brew houses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, have you heard of Christian Hansen? They are the fermentation experts with over 100 years of experience in dairy and wine. They're now bringing that knowledge of microbes to brewers with their Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria. This portfolio allows for consistent performance at the brewery and produces a range of high-quality brews. Reimagine what your beer can be. Go to chr-hansen, HANSEN.com to learn more on the Smart Bev line of products. And join the craft beer community in Sacramento, March 19th through 22nd for the California Craft Beer Summit. Access educational sessions on business and technical skills and network with industry leaders all under one roof. Speakers include David Walker, Natalie Vinnie-Chilurzo, and Ken Grossman. The summit is an important opportunity for your entire brewing team, from production to sales to marketing, to develop their knowledge, skills, and experience in the industry. Visit cacraftbeersummit.com for the full speaker and seminar lineup and to register. All right, so we've got quality honey. You've determined that, and I imagine we could probably talk about that, and just focus the entire podcast on that. But I would love to actually talk about some process around mead making as well. You within the meadery yourself, you try to keep temperature on that honey as low as you possibly can. You have a very slow process for using those bee blankets to bring those drums up so that it can then flow, but you're not going to degrade the quality of the honey. What does the process then look like after that for you? And what are some of these differentiating points that you start really focusing on in order to maintain quality then through the fermentation and then fruit process?
It's starting with the drum of raw honey, or a pail of raw honey if you can get it. Heating it very slowly, trying to keep the temperature at about 100 degrees is really important.
100 degrees, okay.
If you are in a hot room and you want to do things quickly, it'll be up to 130, 140, and you'll have your honey from solid to liquid in a day or a day and a half. For us, it takes a week or more sometimes. It's really slow. From there,
what difference does that make? What happens to honey if you bump it up to 130, 140 for a fast heat to get it flowable quick?
You can do this at home if you have a jar of honey and like a double boiler setup or like a sous vide type setup. You can crank the heat up on honey and your whole kitchen will smell like honey. And the reason that is because those molecules are leaving the honey. And so if we're then trying to,
all the aromatics that way.
Yeah, exactly. And so with raw honey, it is actually more like blood. It's more like wine. It is a living thing. It's got enzymes. It's got yeast. It's got bacteria. And turns out, 20 or 30 enzymes or so that are from the honeybees actually do a lot of really necessary things for the honey. And when you filter and when you heat, those enzymes are degraded. Brewers are really, we talked about it in the article, brewers are extraordinarily familiar with enzymes from enzymes being in malt. Not a lot of people realize there's enzymes in honey. Alpha amylase in honey, is degraded with heat. And so bakers, if you're making bread with honey, you don't want that enzyme there because your bread will be out of control. Not having all that stuff in there, all of the flavor, all of the aroma, all of the enzymes, even all of those other components that aren't in a lot of other honeys that are graded for, the shelf at Walmart, having the beeswax, having the propolis, having all of those other hive products is what they call them, all the pollen, all of that stuff, really does add to the beverage. I mean, you can take the difference between a real cherry and a cherry dum-dum sucker is a matter of opinion, really. It's some organic chemist somewhere saying that this is what cherry is going to be like. And when you have ultra-filtered honey that's been heated 20 different ways to Sunday, what you're getting is this like shell of what it actually is. And so using raw honey, processing it slowly, retains more of that flavor and aroma. It takes time. It sucks. You can't do it in a big processing room. I think they call them hot tanks, but they're really like drive-in rooms where you flip the drum upside down, and as it's melting, it goes into the tanks. And then you can process it, and you're heating it in every little manifold. From there, once it's liquid, we use the pump. Using a honey pump is really the best thing that you can do for yourself. I said, if you love yourself and you're a meadery owner, get yourself a honey pump. If you're a brewery owner and you've got somebody, lifting 100 pails of honey, you really need to reconsider your life's choices. But using the pump also allows you to do fun things. When we first started out, we were using a stick blender, more or less. It's a commercial stick blender. It's 4 feet long. You get it at the restaurant supply store. And we were mixing right in the drums. I think the first drum was difficult, but once you empty a drum, you've got a drum, and now you can use it to mix. And so we would mix honey and water right in the drum. They're lined with a food grade liner. They're really kind of handy. We've since gone on to get what's called a pump over cart, which is a really handy utility cart that can contain liquid, and it's stainless. It's really awesome, but it's not quite to the level of a mixing tank. So Latina, for example, makes an amazing mixing tank on wheels, 4,000 liters, big motor on the top. And so most people in the meat industry, when we started, were using mixing tanks. If they were of a size that would necessitate that they would buy a honey pump, they would be filling the tank with their water and then pumping the honey into it and using this big paddle wheel to mix their honey must and then pump that into a fermentation tank of some kind. So they were doing that at Bee Nectar even when we got started. And I think it was a 4,000 liter mixing tank, but that was a lot of space. I mean, you saw some of our tanks. Some of our biggest tanks are 3,100 liters or so. So 4,000 liters is a pretty big tank for us. And we really didn't have an idea of where we wanted to put it, and it was a little bit too big. And we're like, we don't really want to do this. So we just did our little stick blender thing for a long time. And then I don't know how it started, but we were having some conversation about the honey going in and the water going in and the honey must coming out. And I think I probably made some stupid comment about the flux capacitor from Back to the Future. And I said, well, what if this was kind of continuous or semi-continuous, and we just use a high-speed wine pump to recirculate the water at top speed, and then the honey pump in separately at a slow speed. At the time, our high-speed wine pump, it was one single speed, on or off. It was really challenging. But the honey pump was a variable speed, self-priming, awesome pump. Most brewery pumps are more along the lines of what our honey pump is now. But a honey pump is uniquely capable of pumping high viscosity fluids. And so you don't have to heat your honey to 140 degrees just to pump it. You can heat it to 90 or so and run the pump slower. You're not going to be ultra efficient manufacturing god, but pump the honey slow, water high speed, and then out comes this amazing mixture of honey and water. And at the same time, you're pumping a ton of air into the must. And so we just started doing that, I think, in the drums. And then we graduated to a tank when we did our first nutmeg mead this way. And that was kind of a revelation. We were like, we don't need to use the stick blenders anymore. The honey pump not only is a safety device and a necessary device for working with the honey, but it's also now part of the process. So what we now call the flux capacitor method is how we mix our honey and water. And very quickly after I won't name any names, but I told some other meadery owners that we were doing this, and they were like, wait a minute, you're doing what? I was like, yeah, just use your honey pump. And they were like, you're what? We don't have one. A lot of people were using these mixing tanks and going in with the pails. So you have this really tall mixing tank full of water, it's a relatively expensive tank. And then you're lifting the pail over your head. And I said, listen, you got to stop doing that.
Yeah.
We've come up with this new thing. We don't know what we're doing. We're figuring it out as we go, commercially speaking. We can't just use the drill and the paddle wheel anymore, which is basically what the stick blender was. It's a commercial version of using a drill at home. So I don't know if there's any sort of correlate with home mead makers at the moment, but if you're a commercial mead maker or brewer using honey, listening to this, get yourself a honey pump, because it changes everything in terms of your safety, your respect for your own body as a worker. And then also for process, it's super easy to integrate into a mead making process like we use without having to have that gigantic tank sitting empty in the corner. We just mix in the pump over cart, or we mix right in the tank. If it's a tank that we're going to put 2 metric tons of fruit in, the fruit goes in the tank, and we'll use the pump over cart to mix 2 or 3 little batches of must. But it's pretty formulaic at that point.
Sure.
And the flux capacitor method really is, in my opinion, the industry leading method.
Yeah, we knew we had, well, before we opened, we knew that we were going to try and buy honey direct from beekeepers. And if you're going to buy from from a beekeeper who's producing quantities that are sufficient for us to make commercial batches of mead with, it was going to arrive here in drums. And we knew that we didn't have any means of dealing with that unless we got ourselves a honey pump. So we had a honey pump before we had a meadery. That was one of the first things, along with a few drums of honey from a friend of mine who's a beekeeper, that we bought, and we've been using it ever since. It's the bottling line is a magnificent thing, right? I'm not going to deny that the bottling line is a magnificent thing, but in terms of just having gone from amateur mead maker kind of guy to being able to move and then empty a drum of honey, that was just a huge transition there. And when James is saying, you can slow it down, when you slow it down, it means the difference between taking maybe 12 minutes to empty an entire 55-gallon drum of honey, or taking 16 or 18 minutes to empty an entire 55-gallon.
It is a dangerously powerful pump. I mean, it'll take cold liquid honey and lift it 15 feet in the air. So, it's a very relatively low speed, very high torque pump. And we've had it since before we really were making good use of it, really. I mean, we were using the stick blenders in the drum, and the honey pump was sitting over in the corner wondering what the hell we were doing.
No.
But we were really spoiled.
We were using the honey
pump.
We were using the honey pump the whole time. Yeah. I mean, I've got pictures of the first batch we ever made, and we used the honey pump on it.
No, I
You
understand.
guys are really passionate about the pump. It's
It is a Vermont flexi pump. You can't buy one
They don't
anymore.
exist anymore. I don't think
They are no longer for sale. But we're gonna try and we're gonna keep ours going. We bought a huge selection of replacement parts. So
buying a honey pump with triclover fittings on it was relatively challenging. I think we had to do it custom, and the fittings are way too close. And so I think there's an opportunity in the market for somebody that's making equipment for brewers, for mead makers, to make a pump that fits, because the beekeeping standard is not a triclover fitting. They have all kinds of different quick connects and din
Dins.
fittings, and
Yeah.
it's so just sourcing a good pump was relatively challenging.
Yeah.
And this company I don't think exists anymore, but there are honey pumps that you can get out there. You're going to get them from beekeeping supplies basically, and you may have to get your sanitary welder to put the fittings that you like on it. But I wouldn't, if we were going to do it all over again, I wouldn't create a meadery of any size without getting a honey pump.
Yeah.
Just because as an advocate for workers and human beings in general, lifting pails of honey is not an activity that the human body is meant to do.
Sure. Well, let's talk about fermentation from there. You mentioned that this using this honey in this raw and processed form, means there's a lot more in there, including enzymes, which can impact fermentation. Obviously, that kind of stereotypical approach to mead is that you have a very nutrient poor fermentation that you need to make sure the yeast has what it needs to kind of function in that environment. For you all, how does fermentation using honey in this way, what does that look like? And then how does the fruit that you find yourself using also impact the approach to fermentation?
So I think generally speaking, I learned, I'll make an analogy that I think is pretty apt. When I first got, my first foreign car was a Volkswagen, and I was putting regular gas in it. And the first time I had an engine issue, the guy looked at me like I was totally stupid. And I didn't know you had to put a certain octane level of gas in certain foreign cars. So like a lot of mead makers are approaching mead fermentation like they have a race car and they're putting regular unleaded in it. It's a very nutrient poor fermentation. They're using yeasts that are really like the race car of yeast. If they have an alcohol tolerance of 18-19%, I guess a very tolerant yeast in many respects of acidity, of alcohol, of osmotic pressure, and then you're providing it with little to no nutrients. So we kind of approach fermentation, generally speaking, and Ken can speak on it more, but we generally are approaching it like this is a really fine automobile and you have to take care of it.
Yeah,
because otherwise it's going to run like shit.
Yeah, we're gonna try to provide the yeast the amount of assimilable nitrogen that it needs to complete the fermentation to the alcohol level that we're shooting for, and then completely run out. Which may be a little shy of what winemakers, for example, might recommend. But this isn't proprietary. We're going to shoot for 225 parts per million of yeast assimilable nitrogen in our originating must, and to some extent, we will also adjust that through experience. And if we learn, for example, that one of the things
experience of exploding tanks.
Well, we learned, for example, that you don't need to add any nitrogen to a raspberry mead, because the raspberries had about 650 parts per million of yeast assimilable nitrogen in just the juice. So even if we were adding a little bit of water and a bunch of honey, that had
still do the dilution, and it's still the right kind of concentration of that.
Yeah, where you're still high.
Yeah,
you're still above where you really want to be. So we do measure the assimilable nitrogen content in the fruits. We haven't measured all of them. I'll be completely honest with you. It's expensive to do, and we haven't done it. And it also means you've got to really go ahead and do some crazy stuff to get the information that you need. But we shoot for 225 parts per million of yeast assimilable nitrogen, and hope that, in the ideal scenario, you're not leaving anything for other microorganisms to feast on when your fermentation is complete. That's you just want to everything likes assimilable nitrogen. Humans like assimilable nitrogen. Amino acids are part of the package here in just about everything that's not a plant. So
that's especially important. I don't mean to interrupt you. I have a sticky note for me, so don't interrupt. But that's especially important if you're making the style of mead that we're making, because a lot of people think and a lot of professional mead makers have tried to make the types of mead that we make. We're not filtering anything. We're not using sulfite. We're not using sorbate. We're not using any chemical preservatives at all. And so if
really just no stabilizers, no
nothing,
wow,
No
and
sorbates. Nothing.
a lot of people are like, I can do that. And they'll try to do it, and you'll end up with exploding bottles in your basement or on the shelf at retail. And it's because they're leaving nutrients at the end of the day in the product. There are a lot of mead making regimens that are just like, they leave a ton of nutrient in the finished product. So you have to use sulfites, you have to use sorbates. And even then, it's going to taste like that stuff. It'll taste relatively yeasty. So one of the very common yeast nutrients that's used in mead making is basically yeast hulls, boiled yeast. And there are certain protocols which, in my opinion, as a rule, you can taste the dead yeast. And at the end of the day, it tastes really kind of mineral, and I can kind of tell. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna.
I'm not naming any names.
I'm not gonna comment. My entire principle. We use diammonium phosphate for a good chunk of the assimilable nitrogen that we're trying to get into the. And we also use some fermate O in order to try and provide the micronutrients that the yeast needs, because it needs more than just assimilable nitrogen. There's a really good article on this whole concept called Optimizing Honey Fermentation. If you Google those words, Optimizing Honey Fermentation, there's this guy that wrote this really good article on how to do yeast fermentation or mead fermentations, and you'd probably be worth a read. But our concept is that, I mean, if you're using DAP and you're using it at sparing levels, you're not using it exclusively. You're adding it after the lag period has begun. You're following all of the protocols that you need to follow to not blast everything right off the bat and whatnot. Then you can use the DAP, and it's all gone when you're done. It's completely consumed. Yeast needs phosphates as well as the ammoniums that it the NH3 groups that it's going to get out of DAP, and so theoretically, or maybe even more than theoretically, in reality, it's all gone if you've done it correctly, and that's part of our mentality. It's a Pfeifferism again. Use only what you need to use, and no more.
It's interesting. Obviously, the idea of natural winemaking is very current. Within the wine world, there's plenty of fans of natural wine, and of course, within that world, there's also a wide range of quality of producers in there, and there are those that are sloppy and make it quote unquote natural, and allow for some of the mistakes that come along with that just express as quote unquote character, but in fact making true high quality natural wine is an incredibly precision process, as you mentioned it, that you have to nail every little piece of this so that that finished product works exactly the way that it should, and doesn't create any additional processes there after the fact, because you don't have any way to stop things from happening otherwise.
Right.
It's very sweet. So our meads are in the sweet wine category if you're to measure them, but some of them are literally off the chart for what normal, like the category of sweet wine generally is. And so some of our meads are sweeter in the bottle than a lot of meads are before they're fermented. So not only do you have to nail all those things as a natural winemaker, but you have to understand that what you're creating is a potential bomb. It's either going to be
it is still highly fermentable as it's sitting right there in the bottle. Sure.
And a lot of people, they think you're misspeaking when you tell them what your final gravity is. It's like, no, you need that amount of sweetness because we put in a metric ton and a half of black currants, and black currants are really bracingly acidic. If it's just slightly sweeter, it will be totally out of balance. So there are a lot of elements that go into that.
That is really cool, though, that you are, having to measure and incorporate what that fruit will do in this process, because you're using such a significant amount of fruit in this as well.
Well, I'll use the catchphrase that I've used in the past. We're playing with dynamite. And I say that because yes, we're leaving a lot of sugar in there, but we're fermenting fruits. If you're familiar with most wines, Chardonnays or Cabernet Sauvignons or Merlots, Pinots, we're fermenting fruits that have either a few times or many times the amount of acidity that's in wine grapes. Maybe 6 grams per liter, 8 grams per liter, sometimes 10, and something that's really acidic, like a Trocken Riesling, for example. But we're fermenting cherries and raspberries that are going to come in at 22, 23, blackberries that can come in at 33, and then blackcurrants that can come in at 80 to 100 grams per liter of acidity. And so there's no way you can ferment that dry and have it be balanced. Yeah. You have to have, in order for it to be pleasant, in order for it to be delicious, you have to leave a corresponding amount of sugar in the beverage. And we have spent a lot of time trying to work out the recipes such that we add that much sugar at the beginning of the honey, at the beginning of the fermentation, and end up with the level of sugar that will be delicious when you're done. But as James said, that's going to leave a whole lot of potential for disaster there. If you're leaving that many grams of sugar in your finished product to balance that many grams of acidity in your finished product, you'd better be doggone clean.
And that would mean then that every recipe that you have, it takes into consideration the exact fruit that you're using to nail the right balance of sugar to acidity in the finished product, that there really is not just a consistent same base recipe, but that fruit is that integral piece of everything. And that would then depend on where you're getting that fruit, what the season looks like for that fruit, all these other additional kind of complexities that feed into that.
Well, so we're doing that kind of winemaking that a lot of mead makers are not doing, which is that we're trying to do the same thing 20 times a year. We're trying to do the same, we're trying to make the same product or with a similar amount of consistency from a highly variable agricultural product. Well, all of them are highly variable.
Many different agricultural products.
But we're not trying to do, 45 new SKUs in 2023. We're going to make the cherry mead. We're going to make the raspberry mead, and we're going to use the same honey and the same fruit, and it's going to be batch number 12, and it might be a little boring, but we have nailed this process and these recipes in a lot of ways because we've done them over and over and over.
I'm gonna beg to differ with James right here on a podcast. But with the it might be a little boring thing, because that's precisely what people are doing in Vin Romanée, right? They're making the same thing with the same grapes year after year after year, and the magnificence in that, and that happens in Barolo and Barbaresco and in Burgundy and in the German Riesling growing areas. They're working with one thing. They're working with one grape, and the only thing they can do to differentiate themselves is to increase their quality. They don't have the option to do different things with it. And I mean, we're really fortunate in the world of mead in that we can. When there is no rule right now that says, okay, you mead makers, you can only do this, right? We can do whatever the heck we want, right? And we are making it up as we go along. But by the same token, the restrictions that are placed around those winemakers force them to work on quality. And they're not out there trying to come up with a new recipe all the time. They're out there trying to figure out, how can I make this Nebbiolo grape more delicious in a bottle?
Yeah.
That kind of discipline, that kind of restriction and focus and limitation creates for them a field in which the only thing they can do, right, is focus on quality.
And you've got brewers doing a similar thing. I'm not saying it's boring to me, by the way. It's boring to the folks that are looking to get their ticks up on Untapped. If they need that 5,000th check-in for 2022, You're probably not going to find it at Tram's Mead because we're trying to nail what we're doing.
Like
In
a
brewing,
lager brewer that wants to brew the same beer over and over again and keep working on perfecting it. That's the way that you all are approaching this.
Chris is a fantastic example.
Chris Johnson from Green Bench.
He has obsessed over his Czech Pilsner for years, and I really, really love what he's doing with it. And when I was there, he poured me like five or six. It seemed like more than 5 or 10 different Czech Pilsners, and poured them 5 different ways. And the same Czech Pilsner poured 4 different ways changes and he's just so obsessive about it, and he's focused in on that one style, and it is really, I think, a model for a lot of brewers in a lot of ways. You got to nail what you're doing before you try to adjunct it 25 different ways.
I think our audience can certainly appreciate that kind of discipline in your process around that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the parameters of those fruits, because again, you all work very closely with that, and I think that's something that people would love to help understand. You mentioned some of the differences in acidities in those fruits. How do you are there any other concerns that come with specific fruits that create or that push process in different kinds of directions?
So yes, fruit, when you're buying a metric ton of fruit, it's a little bit different than if you go down to the shop. A lot of mead makers at the home scale, they assume, and a lot of chefs, they assume the fresher is better. Like if you get something fresh and it's not frozen, it'll be inherently be better. With fruit and with vegetables, in many respects, at least in the United States, as industrial agriculture is set up right now, that's not always the case. Your tomatoes are green and hard like a rock when they're picked, and they end up on a truck, and then they don't ripen, until it's in a different state. It's the same way with a lot of fruit. They pick them unripe, because unripe, they're more solid. They're not leaking all over through the cardboard tray. You can process it. And so there's this transition from buying or thinking about fresh fruit to thinking about frozen fruit, because a lot of people erroneously think just because it's frozen, it's less of a higher quality. But more often than not, and cherries is a great example, if they're really truly ripe, they don't really go through the pitting machine very well. It's a messy process. And for the processor, you're losing money in the form of this liquid that they turn into concentrates, and they try to recoup some of their money on it. But picking at the peak of ripeness and then having it frozen, sometimes directly in the field with a blast tunnel, can actually be much better, because they're picking it when it's got more sugar, when it's got more acid, when it's got more flavor. And then you've got two different forms that you can get the fruit in. You can, if you're looking for whole real fruit like we are, and I guess it's a big if for a lot of brewers. We are using whole fruit exclusively. We don't use any fruit purees or concentrates or flavorings or anything like that. We will get it in what's called IQF, individually quick frozen, which is a really great way to get fruit, or straight pack. And straight pack is just basically in a bucket, frozen solid, and that can be relatively challenging when you're at the top of a 10-foot ladder and you've got your thermal well at the bottom of the tank that you don't want to destroy. And so we've done that. It's possible. It's very loud, especially the first couple 40-pound blocks. But, bombs away in over the top with the fruit, either IQF or straight pack. Straight pack is relatively challenging to...
You don't have bee blanket style heaters for your straight packs?
No. So we try not to defrost the fruit too much. We just installed a 40-foot freezer container at the orchard. So we're going to have some ability to do some controlled defrosting, but we've never really had any sort of walk-in that could... it would have to be for pallets and pallets of fruit. So generally speaking, when it comes in frozen, we put it right in the tank, because it's easier to work with when it's not leaking everywhere. Because it's a bag in a box when you buy fruit, 40 pounds IQF at a time. And I prefer IQF. It's easier to work with. You can use something like a fruit elevator like they would have at a grape winery. We just put it right in over the top, and it's a relatively straightforward 2-man process. One guy's on the top and one guy's on the bottom. But there is that. There's a difference between the fresh stuff and IQF and straight pack, and it kind of shakes out in terms of your process. But we use both.
Yeah, and there are. I mean, there's a perfect world out there, but it doesn't really exist. It might be great to be able to make raspberry meads that were never frozen, right? And I did the first char-baked cherry mead that I've ever done in my life that was not frozen this past batch. There were only like 130 bottles, 127 bottles of it. It's just incredible. But there are realities, if we have to do 3 pickings of the cherries, and we did more than, I think we did 2 this past year, and you can't do that. You can't like, oh, I'll just hold up with these and throw them in the tank and just wait until. No, you got to pit them and use them. And the same, the issue with raspberries is you can't pick. I mean, if raspberries are, you pick a few every day, you pick a few every day, you pick a few every day. Even commercial operations, and that's you're not going to come up with quantities to make commercial sized batches in one day. You're going to end up, if you're going to make a raspberry mead, the great likelihood is you're either going to make 6 gallons a day, or you're gonna make it with frozen fruit. It's just a truth. But in terms of when we're talking about fruit, I mean, really right now we're kind of obsessed, right? We're starting our own orchard,
right?
If I can do the segue, if I have permission,
go for it. That was going to be my next question, because I think this is a natural thing to talk about.
Well, it is a whole nother plate in the air, because the picking of the fruit is also like it's a whole nother can of worms, right?
It is.
The picking of the fruit at ripeness is pretty key.
It's pretty key.
If you're shaking out a tree of cherries, you're getting everything, and you're done with the tree. Sometimes they come back and they shake them a little bit, but there are certain fruits that are processed by machines, and they're getting everything. They're not getting just the ripe ones. So what you're getting, what the form, is it IQF? Is it hand picked? Is it machine? Is it machine picked? It's all, it all matters, especially for something like black currants, especially something like cherries. They can be picked by machines.
They can be, but then you get everything. And if we're picking, and especially in the instance of black currants, you can pick for true ripeness by having a human hand go in there and figure out these are really ripe and these are really not. You can tell by the amount of effort it takes to pick them. You can tell by the texture of the fruit and the shade of the fruit and all those decision making processes. And in fact, decision making processes are right at the core of all of this. This is what's most exciting about mead for me, but also most challenging, because unlike in beer and brewing, we've known for a long. There's a few new hops that are coming along here and there, but Fuggles and Cascades and Centennials, they've been here for a while, and Sots and Hellertau and Tettnang, these are varieties that have been determined. And the same thing is true with the grains that we're using, Harrington and the Marisot or whatever. These are things that have been known for a considerable period of time. Same thing in the wine world. Everybody knows the difference between a Merlot and a Pinot and a Nebbiolo and a Sangiovese. Those things are worked out in the wine world and have been for centuries in a lot of instances. But here's mead just poking its head up and deciding, oh, you know what, we can make delicious mead with these fruits. But just the same way there are hundreds of different varieties of grapes, there are at least dozens and probably more like hundreds of different varieties of black currants and raspberries and gooseberries. And no one's the manual's not there. You can't just flip it open to page 22 and say, oh yeah, this is the best gooseberry to make mead with. The only way
you don't have a catalog with the fermentation characteristics of each gooseberry?
No. And furthermore, I mean, the same thing is true with in terms of yeast utilization.
Right.
Okay, that's great. You know what they do with the grapes. We have a totally different substrate. But getting back to the getting back to the fruit question, we want to know. We want to know what is the best gooseberry out there, or for that matter, what are the differences between the different gooseberries when you ferment them with honey? What are the differences between different blackcurrant varieties that when you ferment them as a mead? That information is going to be right available to us as soon as we're done figuring it out. And so
Can't wait to read that book from you.
well, that's what the orchard is about.
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
what the orchard is for. We have
It's
right
a learning
now,
lab, and you're able to,
we have 4 different varieties of blackcurrants over there. We have 2 different varieties of red currants over there. We have 2 different varieties of white currants over there. We have pink champagne
we have
currants.
more than that.
Maybe we
I
do.
was,
I think we
I-
have- I
my
think we have
first
3
reaction was that doesn't sound like
I think we have
more than that.
3. I think we have 3 white currants.
We're varietal obsessed people.
We're varietally obsessed people because varietal everything is how, I mean, that's varietal hops, varietal barleys to make malt with, varietal grapes to make wine with, and then you get to fruit, and it's all just a freaking mystery.
Well, like Black Agnes, for example, is a great example of what you're talking about. It's one of our more popular meads. It sells like hotcakes. We can't keep it in stock. Blackcurrant as a flavor, I think, is something that really resonates with the human body for whatever reason. It's not super common in the United States because it used to be illegal to grow here. But they grow it everywhere in Europe. And we buy the metric ton from Europe because the producers in the United States don't grow enough even for a single batch. But when we get it from this company in Europe, it's 9 different varieties of blackcurrants. We know what they are, but we don't know what the blend is, and they don't even know.
Right.
They're making hundreds of thousands of metric tons for the Ribena syrup people, for other people,
jam makers, that kind of thing. Sure.
And it's the same issue of the supplier isn't sort of tailoring their offering for the consumer, which is us. I would buy the same amount of blackcurrants from them. If they would separate them out, we could sell 9 different kinds, and our customers would really be obsessed over that. We would be obsessed over that. We've made varietal currant meads that are really bad, and some of them that are really insanely good. And you're just like, well, that variety works really well in a mead. That variety is like, it's maybe in a blend it would provide some sort of thing, but as a standalone, it's not really great. And that variety might be in this blend, and we don't know what So from batch to batch, this batch 6 might be better than batch 7. It could be down to some thing that we can't control.
Yeah,
so
the same. I mean,
we're trying to control as many of those variables as we can.
Right, and it's out of our control right now. When you look at how raspberry production occurs, and when you look at how blackcurrant production occurs, these places plant multiple different varieties, and they plant them such that they can extend their growing and harvesting season. Everything doesn't get ripe all at the same time.
Right.
You don't want that to be the case. You want to have these over here get ripe first, and then these over here get ripe next, and these over here get ripe next. The same thing. I mean, the same thing happens with a lot of wine producers with the way their grape varieties become available for fermentation, and that's wonderful. And then they all end up in some giant frozen thing. And like James says, we have no clue. Did we get more of these this year or more of those this year? When were they harvested? What blend were they picking at that time? It's just a crapshoot. And
picking blackcurrants is awful. It sucks. We use like a fork, and your back hurts, and you use a chair, and they don't want to come off. It's not like a blueberry.
Yeah.
And so they have this like car wash type machine which just brushes the whole plant and takes everything. Bugs, bird nests, unripe blackcurrants, ripe blackcurrants, and then they're processing it.
So there is definitely this, more precise way of harvesting at ripeness. From a commercial standpoint, having a human being make that judgment as they're picking a plant or a tree for this fruit, I mean, that's an immense amount of difficult labor, and it's also high cost compared to machine harvesting. I mean, it really demands a different economy around the finished product to be able to support that kind of labor. Those are a whole bunch of additional challenges. It's fascinating and inspiring to see that you are able to communicate that to end consumers and show a difference in the product so that people are willing to pay what it takes in order to support that kind of precision labor around some of these things.
I mean, if I can answer two different subjects. One of them is the decision-making process, and the other one is the scale. But that decision-making process is, in fact, exactly what great wineries are delivering. Right, what you're paying for, the quality that occurs in the bottle, and the reason someone's given it a 95 or a 98 or a 100-point score is the cumulative impact of decision after decision after decision after decision. How much are we going to irrigate? Are we not going to irrigate? Are we going to fertilize? Are we going to what kind of early on? What varieties are we going to plant? Where are we going to plant them? What's our planting density like? All of these decisions all end up manifest in that final beverage. And the people who make those decisions and know how to make that 99-point wine is what you're paying for. I mean, a lot of it is what you're paying for. And then did they decide to do, go through and do multiple tranche pickings while they were, when the fruit was ripe, or did they run a machine down the row and pick everything? All of that is what's important. But then, the issue that we face right now in terms of cost is our scale. Because we're doing the things that we're trying to do with the orchard and with our mead making processes, and we're doing them at very small scale. And if you're a big commercial winery, if you're a Gallo or a Barefoot or Yellowtail or one of these other places that's running their bottling line, sometimes 2 or 3, maybe even 3 shifts a day, the piece of equipment that they spent a lot of money on, they're using 100% of the time. And we're a tiny little winery, and we bought a nice meadery, and we bought a really nice bottling line, and we use it twice a week if we're really cranking. And so, and that's for one shift. So all of those scale issues, and the same thing is true with the other aspects. You need an administrator to take care of all of the compliance activity. You need someone to deal with your human resource stuff. You need an accountant. You need all these things that that drive cost up.
Sure.
And if you're not getting the same level of scale that a huge facility is, a huge brewery or a huge winery is, you have to put that cost somewhere, and it ends up in our price tag, and people wonder, why is it so expensive? And a big part of that is, number one, we're tiny. We're just tiny. And then the second thing is, we are trying to help the mead industry learn about which currants you should use to make the best black currant.
Well, the fruit industry too.
Right. Absolutely.
I think a great example of what you're talking about, scale, small versus large, and how that impacts varietal fruit selection, is with cherries in Michigan. We have mostly Montmorency cherries, which they ripen almost all at the same time. It's a 400-year-old variety. It's like 98% of our cherries. But within a day or two of it ripening, it turns to mush. And so almost all Montmorency cherries have to go to a processor because these growers are just not set up to deal with this mush. And so most of it ends up being produced into concentrates and powders and things like that. And because of that, natural history of this fruit, that's why most of the cherry stuff is concentrate, because the fruit just will disintegrate. And so if you have a cherry beer, it's usually made with this red tart concentrate, which is Montmorency. But the good news is that we're starting to grow varieties here in Michigan and in other places that have better flavor that brewers will want, better flavor, better aroma. And they are varieties that can be picked by machine or by hand. And so you can have an entirely new set of products and quality levels depending on your customer. So this was a grant that I applied for. I think I was denied, but we do a lot of different grant projects and stuff like that. But one of the grants that I was working on, one of the projects I was working on, was working with farmers that are growing these cherries to develop new ways of growing this fruit that are, maybe more mechanized, but also respectful of the flavor and the aroma for different uses. So cherries in particular, I think every brewer out there, if you're using red tart concentrate, just use Balaton cherries. Just try one like little pilot batch of some different variety and see what the differences are, because it's night and day. It's like the fruit versus the sucker, you know?
Yeah, yeah. We're getting on in time here. I want to talk about corks before we wrap this up, because obviously we've got corks sitting in front of us. This is also something that those that make corked beer, can engage with as a subject. Talk to me about corks, James. I think this is really your subject.
I am a bit of a cork dork, and usually that means that you like wine and you study wine and you're a nerd for wine. I'm actually a cork dork in that I've spent too much of my time trying to find really great corks and trying to understand what the cork is actually doing. For us, we are making it, in many respects, a traditional wine, and our packaging is ancient technology, which is glass bottles and corks. The benefit of the cork is that it will fill in those gaps in between that they may exist in glass bottle manufacture. So it's a really handy tool because you don't need really high precision manufacture of glass bottles. But also it does these amazing things to well-made wines as they age. And so it's a traditional closure. We use it for a lot of reasons. It is, in many respects, a mark of quality, at least in terms of what the consumer thinks. There's a lot of consumer psychology surrounding corks. The reality is that like 85%, I think maybe I'm making this statistic up on the spot, but most wine is consumed within 48 hours of purchase. So if you're putting a cork that's rated for 20, 30 years in your bottle, it's generally wasted. But for that subset of customers that wants to age their mead or their wine or their beer or whatever, cork can be a really amazing choice. It doesn't actually transmit oxygen like people think. We used to talk about oxygen transmission rate through a natural cork. And it's true that there are various packaging methods that you can use where oxygen will actually enter the bottle from the exterior environment. But the latest research from Paulo Lopez and others have indicated that oxygen's not actually going through a natural cork. It's coming from the lenticels of the cork itself. So you can seal the bottle over with lacquer or epoxy, and it will age the same as a bottle that is aged properly. The issue becomes...
So you don't need to cap or wax it. That's what you're saying.
Oh, the wax is doing nothing.
Yeah.
I love wax, especially on a beer bottle. Wax on top of a crown cap is so funny to me because it is doing nothing. Home brewers and commercial brewers, and there are a lot of people that believe wax is actually sealing it, but wax is highly permeable to oxygen. It is a barrier, and it repels water.
It's a barrier to opening your beer.
It's a barrier to it's getting in the way. For wine, wax was the original capsule, right? But the reason why is kind of lost to history. And it's one of those funny questions I like to ask people. It's like, why are we putting wax on top of a cork? Like, what is the actual reason? And they're like, it's to keep it clean. It's to keep it presentable. And it's like, well, not really. Back in the day, in cellars in Europe, they had cork oak moths that would have their larvae go into the cork and just drill a hole in the cork, and you'd have wine on the floor. So you'd have oxygen entering the bottle, you'd have wine coming onto the floor, and the wax was used to protect the cork. And that's it. It's not sealing
just
it.
Keep the bugs
it's
out.
Hiding it from the bugs. We don't have that issue, really. Most cellars that I've been in don't have moths.
I think I've beaten my moth problem in my cellar.
In any case, the capsule is just a facsimile.
And funny how these little foil, wraps now do the same exact thing and keep the moths out.
Well, and most people aren't even using foil. I don't think we have any. Oh, we do have one here. This is a really, really nice capsule, but it's made from tin. It's actually made from metal. Most people are using what's called polylam, which is it's a composite lamination of plastic and a little bit of some sort of metal. This is a full piece of metal that's made from tin, and you could melt it down. And this is a traditional capsule material, but even a capsule is not a traditional thing. The wax was tradition, and the only reason it was tradition was to keep the moths away. Anyway, corks are great. They do have a lot of downsides, like it's a natural material that's highly variable and moths will eat it or whatever. But it is, in most respects for us, the best packaging decision for our style of wine that we're making. If you're making, other styles of beer, you don't necessarily need to spend $1.50 on a cork. Most wineries are spending about 10 cents or less on screw cap or a plastic cork, or even like an agglomerated cork. Or, there are a lot of different. We could do a whole nother podcast on cork, I think, but we have some different ideas about cork. Like I said, we spend about $1.50 per cork on some of these, whereas most people are trying to get them for like 10 cents. And the reason we're doing that is because these are going to provide you, if you want, with the ability to age this properly in your cellar for 20 or 30 years. And if you have a wine cooler, it could be upright. If it's in your cellar, you should lay it down to keep the cork supple. But pretty much it'll be a perfect little seal if your storage conditions are correct. It'll be 100% humidity inside the bottle, and it'll maintain a nice seal. The oxygen will come out of the cork at a controlled rate into your wine, and that's important. If you have a plastic cork or various other methods, you have to start thinking about oxygen transmission, because the oxygen will come from the exterior environment into the bottle. And sometimes that can be very quick. If you have a bad seal on a crown cap, it's a matter of weeks before your wine will be vinegar, especially if you make it the way that we make it. So the cork is pretty important to us. It's a challenge. It's an imperfect material. It can become contaminated with chloroanisole. So cork taint is something that a lot of people are familiar with, but some people still aren't. On our higher end of corks, I'm a huge proponent of the NDTech technology, the individually screening of corks for this TCA molecule. They use an ultra-fast chromatography solution, which is like 10 seconds per cork. It's not something they're rolling out for every single cork. There's two companies that sell most wine corks, Amram and Portacork, and Amram owns Portacork. The Amram family, it's basically a monopoly. They've vertically integrated from the forest to this bag that's sitting in front of us. But they've invented this technology, this NDTech technology, and they've made it available to Portacork as well. I'm a huge fan. There are other techniques for ensuring the quality of your cork, but for me, it's cheap insurance. On a bag of 1,000, we may spend $1,250 plus another $150 on the screening process. If I can, so the extra $150, if we're putting this into a bottle of mead that we're selling for $180, if I avoid one tainted bottle, it's an easy decision for me. But it's not something that a lot of people are doing. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I love, if you care about it, if you're going to lay it in your cellar for 20 years, you don't want to have any surprises. And that taint from the cork enters the wine within 48 hours. So whether you're going to open it right away or not, the wine can become tainted if you're not making good decisions on packaging.
Let's zoom out in the close here and talk about the big picture. What do you hope to achieve? What is next for Schramm's? And do you have this goal that you'd like to achieve through this business?
Well, we've talked about it a lot here, and we've discussed the fact that we really need all the time to be thinking about kind of our 1-year goals. There's all these. James and I are both. We both have a long list of things. We'd love to have that fruit elevator. We'd love to have a floor scrubber. We'd love to have there's 12 machines that we would love to have. That's the kind of the 1 year, 5-year plan. But the orchard is more of a 50-year plan.
Yeah.
And I've said a lot that, in a world where Weihenstephan is going to be 1,000 years old, hopefully in my lifetime, and where there are wineries that are more than 1,000 years old, it's not silly or inappropriate for us to be thinking about having a 500-year plan. This is, high quality alcohol. I don't think it's going anywhere. There's a lot of people out there that are harping on alcohol right now and talking about how bad it is for your health. We've had an alcohol dehydrogenase gene in what became Homo sapiens for like 6 million years. So there's something about alcohol that we're attracted to that works with humans. And so I think the notion that we should look at, what this could be like 500 years out is not, it's not ridiculous. And it's almost more of a thing that you kind of wonder why more people aren't doing it. If you know it's going to happen, you might want to plan for it. So that's our approach, is that we are looking at what things can help make mead better. We are 10 years in, and we're probably one of the better meaderies in the country, or who knows, maybe in the world. But we should be looking at, if there are wineries that are 1,000 years old, how do we take lessons from them, and how do we build what we're doing as Schramms into something that has the potential to last for 1,000 years and hopefully keep getting better and having the right impact on the world that we live in.
1,000 years. That is the most amazing answer that I have ever gotten to that question, and some grand ambition, but also a beautiful way to try to guide the business in a way that makes long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions, that looks at this, lineage and future more so than just the short term. And I think that that's reflected in the quality of everything you do. It's truly beautiful, and that's a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling and offers 24/7 service and support. Raw North Star Pils is a base malt you can set your compass by. AccuBrew gives brewers like you unprecedented insight into your fermentation process. ProBrew solutions are specifically designed to help you brew your beer. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands across the U.S. SS Brewtech has taken tech they invented working with industry vets and made them available to every craft brewer. Try Christian Hansen's Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria, and join the craft beer community in Sacramento March 19th through 22nd for the California Craft Beer Summit. Of course, we'd appreciate your subscription to Craft Beer and Brewing. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. If you are a subscriber, you can check out the article that James wrote for our, I guess it's the Pale Ale issue that's out now.
It's an amazing issue, by the way. I think it's understated in this podcast. There's been a redesign, and it's gorgeous.
Oh, thanks.
It is awesome. I'm not just saying that. It looks awesome. And there's some amazing articles in it as well.
I am also our graphic designer, our director, creative director,
I had no idea.
And everything else. I wear a lot of hats around our business, as everyone in this small business world understands and does the same. But thank you for that. I appreciate that. We did try to refresh things as we move to this quarterly format. Some great articles in that issue. Your subscription helps us keep bringing these great conversations to you. And go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on that subscribe button, support what we do. If people want to learn more about Schramm's, where do they find you all?
You can go to store.schrammsmead.com directly. You could go to schrammsmead.com. That's SCHRAMMSMEAD.com. But if you just go directly to the store, we'll be able to get you mead much quicker, I think.
Yes.
We do a lot of shipping. It's the majority of our business is direct-to-consumer shipping through the mail. So if you're in any number of states in the United States, you can get our stuff directly sent to you. If you're listening in Europe, we've got an amazing selection of retailers across the EU that has our product. If you're in Japan, you can get our product. The UK has an amazing series of partners that are helping us get our product out as well. So yeah, just ask for us at your local bottle shop or go to our website.
Fantastic.
Pick up a copy of the Complete Mead Maker.
Yeah, you can get that too.
Ken's book, The Complete Mead Maker, for sure. Must read for anyone aspiring to make their own mead. Well, James, Ken, thank you all for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Cheers.
My pleasure.
Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.